Last week, introducing Nick Cave. I don't think we really need to reiterate his extensive resume and bibliography and everything. So we just wanted to keep it casual and have more of a conversation about his experiences and his work. So I'll just turn it over to Nick. So
Thanks
thank
for
you very
having
much
me.
for being.
So is this the crew that's going to be constructing the pieces? Okay, so we're going to talk a lot about quality. It's so critical. I was telling Tracy that it has to be perfect. So we'll talk about that as I show you some images of the work and sort of get into that. But I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to do this project. Do you know what it is? Well, I'll tell you real quickly and briefly, but I'm going to be working between the arts, the dance, the music department, and we're building this project that's titled Herd. So it's going to be a herd of 30 horses that we're going to be making that will be galloping through Denton. Just sounds so, I can't wait. It's just like I dream about it. It's so exciting to me. And so what's going to happen is that, so I worked with the dance department today, which was like awesome. And to start that sort of process, and then we're going to be working with 100 to 130 sort of percussionists from the music department. So just imagine we're galloping through the town, what do we call it? Town, okay, town. And then they will reach a point where it will be a half circle, which will be made up of all the percussionists. And so the horses will then sort of corral within that space. And then we'll move into a choreographed dance piece. At one point, the front and back will separate. So it goes from 30 to then 60 performers. And then that will then sort of transpire into everybody dancing. So it's going to be a piece that will be structured and then evolve into some other sort of interesting sort of direction, but I'm very excited about being here. But just sort of briefly, I'm just going to run through to show you some work, and then I may go to my website for a minute. But this is Jack Shaman Gallery, who represents me in New York City. I've been with Jack for about 8 years now. Amazing to work with. Why are they amazing to work with? Because they really let me do what I want to do. And as well as the other artists that they represent. But it's nice to be with a gallery that believes in your vision, that can stand behind your vision, and that really are there to support that. And they're like really, really good friends. We have serious fights, but at the end of the day, we respect each other, and again, they're looking out for my best interests. So, this is one of the pieces at the gallery that's from 208. But just to sort of talk about the work, I spend a great deal of time in the flea markets. In my studio, someone asked me a couple of weeks ago about, you must have an enormous inventory. And I said, well, actually, I don't have a large inventory in the studio. The studio is sort of like a lab. It's very clean. It's very clinical. We work on just what we are working on at the current moment. And I just said that basically my surplus is the world outside of my studio. So that's where it all is. So if I need it, I just go out and get it. And it's really, really true. And so I really sort of get what I need. I'm not a hoarder. I don't really sort of have any desire to be that, even though it appears that I am, but I'm really not. And so we sort of just gather materials, but materials are what provokes the idea. I don't really sketch. I can't even imagine like how a spinning top could sort of dictate what could be made. So I really sort of allow the material to sort of be the sort of nemesis behind the work. And it's really sort of purely based on just an emotional sort of response. I'm looking at a lot of stuff all the time, and I was probably looking at spinning tops for years, but I never know when it's going to sort of have meaning or be of any importance in the work until perhaps I maybe think something may trigger that. I really don't know what that is either. But in this case here, what I was thinking about when I was sort of working with these sort of objects, which are spinning tops, noisemakers, and these medallions, which are hot pads. And I really wanted these materials because the hot pads for me function as I said, a medallion, but I like the graphic sensibility that they sort of pair up with the spinning tops and the noisemakers. So it becomes something that's 2D becomes 3D. Also, I was thinking more about the one-man band, that this apparatus that is, applied to the body, and that it's, directed by one individual. So the sound of this is so crazy. And then I was also thinking about, this is what my head feels like most of the time. Just like it's just ideas that are just like exploding and out of control. So it's really, how do I bring these two forces together to sort of come up with this as a solution? This piece that's made out of bags and hats that have been sewn together. The thing that's interesting about the way in which I work is that, I come from a textile background, so I really understand how to build a cloth. And so with the use of these hats and bags, I know that it's going to be three-dimensional because of just sort of my history and coming from a somewhat fashion background, understanding draping. I know sort of all these sort of principles of how to sort of look at form and to establish a way of building sort of really a cloth that will allow me to get to this point here. So these hats and bags sewn together to build a larger piece of cloth, then translated into this object. And then, I happened to find a shoestring company that was going out of business. So they had all these Day-Glo shoestrings. So I just bought them all. Not really knowing what I would do with them, but in this case, what I was interested in is, what happens now is that the surface becomes almost like invaded by some sort of infectious sort of disease. So I really wanted that to be the sort of element that sort of, again, that sort of brings a sense of rhythm, brings another sort of pattern to the surface, and that is a dominating sort of factor in the form. But, looking at West African sort of textiles and vestments, I get to this object by doing research, looking at medicine men, looking at the Gungun tribe in terms of form, shape, and ideas around these altered sort of garments. In my studio in Chicago, I have, on a regular basis, 10 full-time assistants. But the last project that I just did in New York was We had 25 studio assistants to produce the project. But in order to sort of work in the studio, it's not that you can just, well, you never call me anyway, but you can't, it's not that you sort of send a resume. You have to come in and do a one-day sample test. And so basically my head assistants, you come in, they give you a piece of paper with some supplies, and then they just set you free. You follow the instructions, you leave it there when you're done. And so we sort of evaluate it based on whether or not it's really a technical based sort of test, and but not only is it that, it's quality of work, whether or not you can follow instruction, just critical, and just sort of how you sort of go about sort of how do you sort of finish and bring conclusion to something. So then I know right away whether or not you're hard, because we can't really teach you how to do what we do in the studio. We need you to come in with these skills already set in place so we can sort of continue to move forward. This piece is working with just recycled buttons. And then this abacus. Again, this form, this abacus, used for currency, a way of counting. As I found this sort of object, I sort of thought about, I knew that I sort of wanted it here on the face. And so with that being said, then I have to sort of thinking about, okay, so then how does this get supported in stationary within this particular sort of location. So then I have to start thinking about the structure of the actual sort of support system. And so in order for me to even come to this shape, I was in the studio and I was looking up, and this form for the body comes from me looking at the ductwork in the studio. I wanted something simple. I wanted it to sort of, again, to sort of allow this sort of abacus to frame the face. The abacus here starts to function on multiple levels, because the moment then when I put it on, it made me, I started to think about ideas around slavery and being bought, and the fact that this sort of being used for currency sort of made me look through this window at myself in that way. And also the idea of being caged and contained within this space. Again, the sound of this one rubbing against oneself is an amazing sound with the use of the buttons. But with the buttons, it's different if you're sort of sewing buttons. You have two options. Either you sew buttons on fabric, or you make a button cloth. In the studio, it's about a button cloth. So it's really no space really in between the buttons. So it really starts to read as this sort of armor of sorts, this sort of second skin. And then this is another one here. It's all white shell buttons. The sort of facade of this is working with a sifter, which is vintage, covered in wire and bugle beads. What's also is nice that you can literally see through this piece, which is great in terms of performance. And then, what I was thinking about here was, this being this sort of filter, sort of separating me from the world and how I sort of navigate and as I move through life. So, it's this sort of like space in between that sort of keeps me sort of separate in a sense. Again, I'm looking at the astronaut uniform, looking at a Pac-Man, for example, and then bringing these all together to come up with this sort of new idea. Working with human hair, You know, thinking about like Gumby, Bigfoot, uh, and also just sort of wanting to strip down from this sort of very sort of labor-intense sort of way of building to work, and sort of how can I sort of get to the same sort of sensibility, but simplify it by sort of eliminating sort of my resources. And again, you can do that I do that through just sort of my appropriation to a pattern on the surface. And also the sort of visceral sort of sensation of something as simple as hair. This piece really is an extension of the first sound suit. The first sound suit sort of came out of the Rodney King incident in '92. And what I was interested in is just sort of how they brought description to his character. So, you know, I was, from just the readings, you know, they were saying things like scary, larger than life, worked out with prison weights, took 10 men to bring him down, and so on. So what I was thinking about, it's like, what does that look like to me? And then I was thinking about, you know, as a black male feeling discarded, viewed less than, devalued, and started to think about, you know, how can I sort of translate these thoughts, these ideas, and how can I sort of, what materials that can provoke that sort of sensation. So I happened to be in the park one day, and I was just sitting there and looked down, and there was a twig, and I decided to sort of make this sculpture out of twigs, and didn't realize that I could physically put it on. Then I put it on, and then I moved in it, and it made sound. So that was sort of the beginning of sound suits. And from that point forward, I have always been interested in this whole notion of using materials that are discarded or devalued, or looking, and so, you know, that's a critical sort of component in the way in which I build my work today. I'm interested in sort of reevaluating the role of object, and interested in the elevation of and translation of that through the work. And another sort of important factor in my work is that I'm always and will always be interested in holding on to that a little piece of the sort of craft sensibility in my work, because it's such a critical sort of component in my sort of upbringing and in my practice, that I really want that to be relevant in the work. And so just playing with the hierarchy within that as well. And so this piece is a newer work that's featured in Mary Boone's exhibition. Working with pipe cleaners, working with a wickered chair. So the entire back of this piece is a wickered chair, and on the back of the chair is a wickered snail that's three-dimensional. And you know, I was thinking about, you know, again, sort of reparation for the most part here. So it's like, you know, $1 and a mule. Here it's like $1 and a turkey. So it's sort of playing off of that idea. Also looking at sort of, one hand it's like really, really political here. It's like, you know, the body is sort of contained within this sort of coffin type of structure that then makes me think about the sort of guillotines and things that sort of sort of restrain the body in that sense. But then, responding to sort of social sort of identity at the same time within the work. This rainbow sort of pattern that's all made out of pipe cleaners. One day we just got into this amazing pipe cleaner kick in the studio. And let me tell you, I hate pipe cleaners, but it is such an amazing material to build structure. And I think there's another one in here that I will show you. So, but I was thinking about how the use of this material, thinking about the use of pattern, this sort of creating this sort of glow, this halo around the body, and then was thinking about the sort of gay pride flag as a way of sort of association and identity in this sort of sense. So it's just really sort of tying in all of these sort of ideas that are sort of framing this sort of Black sort of figure. And then this is another pipe cleaner piece here. So we're working with pipe cleaners here. We're working with fishing sort of baubles, and just a lot of stuff. And so, in the studio, I'm working flat in terms of building this piece. I have absolutely no idea what the hell I'm doing or making. It's really just going on impulse and just sort of this sort of, I've exercised that so much that I know when something is like alive or like is having life or life is being built through this sort of a way of sort of approaching the work. And I also know when it's done, it just starts to breathe. You're like, what does that mean? No, but and then this is another pipe cleaner piece it's the front and the back. It's made out of the infrastructure is pipe cleaners that have been sort of tied together, building this sort of net. And then on top of that surface is recycled sweaters that have been cut up and then made into tubes, which we call sweater bones. And then those are then woven in and out of this infrastructure to sort of build the volume. So it's about 12 feet high. And so again, what I'm looking at in terms of reference, looking at architecture, looking at totems, looking at mounds, to sort of come to this sort of place where I understand what I'm doing in terms of construction. So this is another sort of button piece. And as you can see around the edge, right here, that's the edge of the wickered basket. So this is concave, so this goes into the body, which is then, again, covered in wire and red bugle beads. So this is an installation shot at the Seattle Art Museum. So at the end of the day, it's like to get to this work, it's like stripping. You must just strip it down and hold on to the bare essence. That's all that you really need. And so for me, it's to get there, it's just through practice, and then it's sort of simple. Let's see here. And so this is my exhibition that's up right now in Jack Shaman Gallery. It's one series of this piece here, which is interesting, is a recycled chair that sits on the shoulder. So right here is the back of the chair. And so basically I just sort of created a draped, so like a chair cover that then the body is supported by. And then this structure here is sort of like this sort of cage that's all out of button. It's open, you can sort of see through it. And it goes about maybe 5 feet high above the body. And so I was looking at the sort of vehicle that, like, sort of the Pope sort of moves in around the world. And I was thinking about it being a transmitting sort of device that if you put this on, that somehow the body sort of then is transmitted up through here, out into somewhere out there. I'm not crazy, but you know, I'm just sort of thinking about, like, you know, how do I come to these ideas? And this chair here, the face is facing sort of the back of the chair on which your back sort of rests against. So I was thinking about, you know, as a kid being told to sit in the corner in school. And so there is this sort of confrontation and friction and tension that's set up there at the same time. And then this opens the exhibition. So when you walk into Jack Shaman Gallery right now, you're encountered with these 10 bunny boys. And so these are the prophets that sort of lead you into this exhibition. And then that exhibition, as you move through the exhibition, you end up with this as the final sort of piece. So this is a figurative landscape that is all constructed out of black shell buttons. And so what I'm thinking about here is, I'm thinking about drawing for the most part. I will get this piece back when the exhibition is down, because then we're gonna, I need to do a video. So it will be, I'm gonna be working with the gospel choir who will be wearing the piece. And as they're singing, they will then be moving across this white space. And so then this will continue to sort of reshape itself as it moves. And, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, a procession of sorts, you know, as, you know, thinking about, like, you know, the death of someone, and thinking in terms of New Orleans, and as they sort of move and in percussion through the city. It's part of the inspiration here. And then it's a figurative landscape, but the piece is titled Speak Louder, which is in response to the sort of youth, sort of crime in Chicago, and the fact that we're losing so many kids, and you know, this form is of a tuba shape, and but yet it's cut off, so therefore, you know, you can't hear it because it's covered up, sealed up. So it's in response to just this sort of outreach into these sort of neighborhoods that are not getting any sort of support or not being heard, and yet we're losing our sort of teenagers. So in Jack's exhibition, the exhibition is totally stripped down. Let me see if I can get to Mary Boone space here. Let me put my glasses on, that'll help me. exhibitions. At the top, where? I don't know if this is going to bring me to my exhibition, but anyway. So, when we were producing these shows, from my end of the studio, there's a lot that happens on my end of the studio. Yes, we have Jack Shaman that represents the work, but we have our own PR team in-house. We have our own vision in-house, in spite of what the gallery's vision is. I have my own ideas about what I want and how I want my work to perform out there in the world. But this is a small video clip that we did a series of these sort of video clips as one would do a trailer for a movie that leads up to the exhibitions. I'm sure you probably all saw this on YouTube. And so what we did is that we would send these out every 2 weeks, a new one, just to bring attention to the show. And so I will tell you, that's me right here. And so when we were shooting the piece, it was, in this particular piece, that sound suit doesn't have a sort of a sight line, so literally I couldn't even see through it. So I'm sort of like sitting there for about maybe 5 minutes in this amazing studio that we shot it in, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got to get a real perspective on space. I've got to know what I'm dealing with, because the moment I start moving, it's like literally just out of control. And so then I've got everyone else that's moving around me. So we came up with a strategy, and it was like amazing. So that video, the actual video, is part of the Jack Shaman exhibition titled Drive By, which is great. This is another piece that's out of, and the structure is the pipe cleaner and then the sweater bones. And so in the studio is we're pretty laid back, stress-free for sure. And it's just really a sort of a studio lab. We're always sort of trying out new materials. We're very interested in the role of performer in the work. How does the work perform outside of my studio? At the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's structure in the studio, but I don't want to have any structure, nor do I want to be responsible for any choices. But it's structure. Underneath it all, there is structure. But it allows me to have this sort of capability and this way of sort of keeping my mind, my way of thinking open and keeping it organic, allow me to flow fluidly through the development of the work. I'm as curious about what's happening in my studio today as I was 30 years ago in undergraduate school. I'm telling you, it's like the same thing. I have the same motivation, I have the same drive. I just can't shut it off. I just have like ideas constantly. But I'm interested in just bringing it out into the world. So being here working on this project, this being the home front of where it sort of is housed and it sort of is being developed, and for us to then to move it out into the world so that everyone can sort of have a shared experience is really sort of important and critical for me. So I'm going to open it up for questions if you have any questions. So as you can see in this work, you know what my demands are in terms of, let's get back to execution. So, it's really sort of critical that, the work is handled and developed properly, and we'll do demos throughout my visits back and forth here. And I look forward to working with everyone, so we'll open it up.
What sort of problems did you encounter with your first suit that we can kind of anticipate?
Struggles, you won't have any struggles here. Absolutely none. It's all sort of, it's really easy. It's easy.
How heavy can your suits get? That's a lot of stuff.
They can get pretty heavy. If let's say if it's like this it's heavy because it's sort of dead weight, sort of. But you have to sort of have a real strong understanding of the body, and because the body becomes the carrier for the work, and not every suit is used for performance. A majority is for sculpture purposes. If I was to translate this into performance, then I would probably make this use styrofoam tubing and then one layer of a net over top. So that changes this probably like 90% of a weight difference. So there's ways that you can sort of renegotiate if it's for performance. What are the sort of appropriate measures that one has to take in order for it to be sort of physically possible to wear?
Oh, Nick, let me see it.
Yeah, so the question is, how do I sort of prefer the audience to respond to my work? Well, I think, within my work, I think, as I said, I have to make a couple of choices here. I have to sort of, how do I sort of get you interested enough to sort of want to spend time with my work? So I have to somehow come up with a way to sort of lead you into the work. Once I've gotten you there, it's really dark underneath. You have the option of like going there or not.
Well, do you have like an intended emotional response? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has to, as I said before, the work has to, I have to remove myself at some point, so it has to live outside of my studio. And I don't necessarily think about it in terms of, how am I going to make that happen? You just, you just know. If it's No, the suits after the performance, what am I going to do with the suits after the performance is the question. They're going to be part of a 90s sound suit performance that will start in Chicago. You want to come and be in it, let me know.
Is it kind of like a one-size-fits-all, or do you base it on the dancers, or do you search for dancers that specifically fit into them?
Here, we're having to sort of, it's going to be sort of really working, like in the dance department today, we sort of we sort of made a selection, and then we sort of lined them up according to who's the tallest to who's the shortest. So and we have to find that middle range. So we'll sort of make, an apparatus that can sort of work between, 2 or 3 different sizes. So there is adjustments that need to be made in order for the fit to sort of fit properly. But in my performance that I'm going to do in Chicago, I'm going to be looking for sort of particular height and size for that piece. And then I'm going to be working with some dance companies. So I may give one company 10 suits, one 15, one 20, and then I have to take that into consideration again at that moment. What are the materials you'll be working on here is the question for the project. You're going to be working with synthetic raffia. That's it. Sorry.
What exactly is synthetic raffia?
Well, it looks like, it's not raffia, but it looks like it's like a ribbon sort of fiber that you're going to be hooking into a net sort of understructure. So I'm in the sort of decision phase of, I'm not sure what color I want the horses to be. Any suggestions? Why? Why purple? Everyone's like, purple, purple.
Best color.
A rainbow pony. Doesn't that sound amazing? That sounds awesome. I think they're going to be black, brown, gray, off-white, and burgundy. But when they break apart, the back end's going to be like magenta and like dago green, and so it's going to be some surprises there. So, yeah. Who is? What was I doing before I made sound suits? I was really sort of building sort of large constructive paintings. So I was working more like, I was doing work that was like 8 by 16 feet that started on the wall, then it would come to the floor. But then I was also doing performance work in between. I come from a dance background, so I've always involved dance. But one thing you must understand is that, school is one thing. When I was in grad school, it's like, what I did. Look, your life is going to turn up 90 degrees, upside down. It's going to flip. So, you never know what you're going to be doing. Let's just hope that it's some sort of art-related something. Or you have to just work hard to make sure that it's that. But yeah, that's what I was doing. But I've always been, even after undergraduate school, me and maybe about 10 of my colleagues, we just, it's really difficult when it's time to graduate. And the rug is just pulled out from underneath. You don't have an option of like tagging on and just hanging out at school for another 6 years. It's like, get out, get on with it. That, you've got to somehow come up with some way of still sort of having a network. And so what we did is that we would rotate, and every other week we would be at someone else's house. So we would do a potluck, and then we would look at their work in order to stay connected and to feel connected. So, it's things like that you have to do. You have to find a sort of sense of community in order to sort of keep the dialogue sort of moving and going. I mean, it's really, really important.
The guy with the cane.
And it's time to go.
Well, thank you so very much for this conversation.